just right there. Welcome and good evening. I'm Alex Jones. I'm the director of the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy here at the Kennedy School of Government, and we're very glad to have you with us tonight on a very happy night. You know, this an evening each year for the Shorenstein Center is a real highlight of the year for us. It's our 27th year of existence, and one of the very first things that happened when Marvin Kalb became the first and founding director of the Shorenstein Center was that he went out of his way to create the Theodore White Lecture. And it has been ever since one of our big moments, and I will have more to say about that a bit later. I want to call your attention to the fact that you were told about the Twitter and hashtags and all that sort of thing. I was also told to say that, but they, I think, believed that I would probably screw that up, so they had a student do it instead. I will not repeat. But we are being live streamed. As some of you already know, the Shorenstein Center was founded in 1986 as a memorial to Joan Shorenstein, a truly remarkable television journalist who died of breast cancer after a distinguished career. Her father, Walter Shorenstein, endowed the center as a place for a focused and searching examination of the intersection of press, politics, and public policy. Walter Shorenstein not only made the center possible, but remained vitally interested in what we do and was our unstinting supporter and friend. He was above all else a great citizen, and the Theodore White Lecture and the David Nyhan Prize are to recognize that same kind of engaged activist citizenship from a journalistic perspective. With us tonight is Walter's son, Doug Shorenstein. Please join me in expressing our appreciation and respect for the Shorenstein family. A bit later, you will hear from our Theodore White lecturer for 2013, Alan Simpson. But first, I have another task to perform, which is also an honor. In 2005, we established the David Nyhan Prize for Political Journalism in memory of our friend and former fellow. David Nyhan was a man of many parts, a devoted family man, a guy who liked to call people pal and meant it, a man with a big personality and a very big smile. As a Shorenstein Fellow, he created a kind of glow. Tonight we honor another aspect of David Nyhan, that of consummate reporter and political journalist, which is the role that occupied much of his life and at which he could not be bested. David was a reporter and then a columnist at the Boston Globe, and his work had both a theme and a character. The theme was always power. Political power, and also especially the abuse of political power by the big shots at the expense of the little guys. And yet he loved politicians. Well, let me amend that a bit. I think the current Congress would have sent him into a frenzied rage, which is also part of who he was. But he would not have been predictable. He was also always surprising his readers with his take on things, because most of all, David Nyhan was his own man, and he called them as he saw them. In his memory and honor, the Nyhan family and many friends and admirers of David Nyhan have endowed the David Nyhan Prize for Political Journalism to recognize the kind of gutsy, stylish, and relentless journalism that David Nyhan embodied. David's wife Olivia is with us tonight, as are his children Veronica, Kate, and Nick, and other members of the Nyhan family, and I would like to ask them all to please stand. This year's David Nyhan Prize for Political Journalism is awarded to Leonard Pitts, Jr. This is Leonard Pitts on the recent film 12 Years a Slave, which has been called by many the most unsparingly honest and clear-eyed film ever made about slavery. Quote, "The film surprises you with its vast silences. It is an emptiness that at first seems jarring to sensibilities trained to believe every moment must be crammed. By contrast, this movie takes you into moments of pregnant stillness. No movement on the screen, no dialogue, no swelling music to cue your emotions. At one point, the camera takes what feels like a minute to study the face of Solomon Northrop, the free black man kidnapped and sold into slavery, as he absorbs the awfulness of his predicament. He does nothing. He says nothing. He simply is. It is that kind of powerful, evocative human writing that has earned Leonard Pitts a devoted following in his syndicated columns and his 2004 Pulitzer Prize for commentary, as well as many other awards. Tavis Smiley of PBS has called him the most insightful and inspiring columnist of his generation. He was born in California, entered the University of Southern California at 15 in a special honors program, and graduated with a degree in English at 19, and he hasn't looked back. Leonard Pitts has a way. You may remember his angry, defiant column in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 when he called, which he called, "We'll go forward from this moment." It was an open letter to the terrorists, and it went viral and has since been set to music, reprinted as a poster, and even read on his show by a much-moved Regis Philbin. He's a man whose words reflect his head and his heart. He's written books on fatherhood, and his book Freeman, or Free Man, I should say, about a freed slave who goes in search of his wife in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, won the Black Caucus of the American Library Association 2013 Award for Fiction. His loyalty is to his view of what is true. While he lambasted the authors of the government shutdown, he also wrote a stinging rant aimed at Barack Obama after the Obamacare collapse that began, "Let us now praise competence," and compared Obama's failure to George W. Bush's disastrous response to Katrina. Connie Schultz of the Plain Dealer in Cleveland summed him up very well. Leonard Pitts refused to be predictable or to rest on his considerable laurels. He is funny when you think there's not a smidgen of humor to be found, enraged at the very moment we thought we no longer cared, and he shakes us up just when we're so certain we have it all figured out. In other words, he makes us better for having read him. To me, he sounds a lot like David Nyhan. It gives me great pleasure to award the 2013 David Nyhan Prize for Political Journalism to Leonard Pitts, Jr.
Wow. Thank you very much to all of you for that very generous applause. Thank you to the Shorenstein Center for this award. I have to say I am very pleased and I'm very proud, and I'm also very sorry for myself that I never knew David Nyhan. I feel like I missed a treat just on what I've been hearing. But I have to admit, having said all of that, that I find myself a little surprised to be a winner of an award for political journalism. I have spent the last 20 years, when people ask me what I write about, I tell them that I am not a political columnist. And now I find out that apparently I am. But what I always mean when I say that, I guess you can get a sense of just by looking at some of the questions that obsess political journalists at this moment. I guess the biggest question of which would be who's the front runner for 2016 in the Republican and Democratic primaries? Is Chris Christie our next president, or is Hillary Clinton our next president, and why? This seems to be a question of obsessive importance with a lot of my colleagues, and with due respect to them, I suppose that there is a place for that. But for me, that's what for me as a political columnist, as a political writer, holds no interest. For me, if you want to talk about politics, you don't talk about it in this vacuum where it's all a game of who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, who's doing well, who's not doing well. These issues, these things, these people have real life weight, real life connotation, real life impact. So rather than talk about who's in or who's out, I like to use the space that I'm granted in the newspaper and on the computer page to talk about the lack of connectedness among us as Americans, this sense that this divide between left and right and red and blue is becoming something that is where we find ourselves living almost in alternate realities. That's politics to me. I'd rather talk about the flowering of gay rights and how amazingly fast it has come to pass that the right of people to love who they love as they wish to love and be respected for that has come to be an American ideal. That's politics to me. I'd rather talk about the erosion of African American citizenship rights. I'd rather talk about the fact that 50 years, almost 50 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, suddenly we have to fight for voting rights again. That is politics to me. And these are the things that obsess me as a writer. These are the things that are important to me as a writer, how we treat one another as black and white, as men and women, as Jew and Gentile, as Muslim and as Christian, how we get along with one another as Americans and how we as Americans get along with the rest of the world. That to me is what politics is about. That to me is the highest cause that politics can serve. And I like to, I will flatter myself in thinking that your award of, your giving to me of this award suggests that I've done in some small measure what I set out to do in bringing light to those areas of politics and in making those things unavoidable for us to discuss, as I would argue they always should be and always should have been. Indeed, we should give them at least as much attention as we do our speculation as to Hillary Clinton's future 2 years hence, 3 years hence. Thank you very much.
Sounds like the very best kind of political reporter and columnist as far as I can tell. Theodore H. White was a consummate reporter himself, and his passion was politics. He came to Harvard on a newsboys scholarship and went on to a very distinguished career as a journalist and also an historian. Indeed, Teddy White, as he was universally known, changed both political journalism and politics when he wrote The Making of the President 1960 about the Kennedy-Nixon campaign. For the first time, he raised the curtain on the warts and all side of presidential campaigns and changed campaign coverage forever. Ever since Teddy White, insider candor and behind-the-scenes drama have been a staple of campaign coverage. He followed that first book with 3 more Making of the President books in 1964, 68, and 72. No one has yet surpassed those smart and groundbreaking examinations of what happens and why in the maelstrom of a political campaign, although some of you may argue that the recent books on the Obama administration come close. It is fair to say that Teddy White's heirs are the journalists of today who try to pierce the veil of politics, to understand what is happening, and to then analyze and deliver the goods on those of us who are trying to understand. Teddy White was one of the architects of what became the Shorenstein Center. One of the first moves Marvin Kalb, the center's founding director, made was to raise the funds and establish the Theodore White Lecture on the Press and Politics in his honor. This year, the White Lecture is to be delivered by Senator Alan K. Simpson, who seems to be known to most everyone as Al. That familiarity and informality and lack of pretense are signatures of the man. The other thing he is known for, and much admired for, is his astonishing willingness to speak his mind. It is not at all surprising that his official biography is entitled Shooting from the Lip. Al was born in Colorado, but has long been identified with the state of Wyoming, where his father was governor and senator. In Shooting from the Lip, which is also a warts and all biography written in a large measure from the personal journals that he turned over to his biographer, the story is not a simple one of a young man inspired. Rather, it tells how a young man who had spent time on federal probation had returned from the Army and fell into a deep depression. Those of us who know Senator Simpson Al Simpson, can only shake our heads in wonder that a man with the zest and exuberance of a teenager could ever be depressed. He shook that depression by getting elected to the Wyoming legislature, then to the U.S. Senate, and after a single term to the position as whip of the Senate's Republicans. For 18 years, he punched political sacred cows, challenged the media, and brought key legislation to passage in memorable fashion. When he left the Senate, Marvin Kalb invited him to teach here as visiting Lombard lecturer, and he went on to be director of the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School. He has been looked to repeatedly for leadership, most prominently when he teamed with Democrat Erskine Bowles recently to seek a solution of what had been long regarded as a looming threat to our nation, our massive and growing national debt. He was, as his biographer observes, an exemplar of something that has all but disappeared: compromise. Throughout his career, he has valued practicality over partisanship, his biographer wrote, and during debate on important issues, he has taken a slice when a full loaf wasn't attainable. This is not to say that he hasn't been a powerful advocate. He has thundered for years about the need to reduce the deficit and the danger of debt, and only last month had the honor of being lambasted by Paul Krugman in the New York Times column as a doomsayer. He doesn't seem to be swayed, as far as I can tell. He has outraged his fellow Republicans by blasting what he viewed as their crazy threat to shut down the government and the pervasive determination of the Tea Party crowd to brook no compromise. As you might expect, the 2012 election campaign debate over tax increases and the debt ceiling crisis provided some vintage Simpson shooting from the lip. For instance, in the heat of the 2012 battle over whether some taxes on the wealthy should be raised, he said, and I quote, "I guess I'm known as a rhino now, which means Republican in name only, because, I guess, of social views, perhaps, or common sense would be another one, which seems to escape members of our party. For heaven's sake, you have Governor Grover Norquist wandering the earth in his white robes, saying that if you raise taxes 1 penny, he'll defeat you. He can't murder you. He can't burn down your house. The only thing he can do to you as an elected official is defeat you in re-election. And if that means more to you than your country, when we need patriots to come out in a situation when we're in extremity, you shouldn't be in Congress." To my mind, Alan K. Simpson is not only a patriot, but a statesman. Would that there were many more like him. It is my honor to present the Theodore White Lecturer for 2013, the Honorable Alan K. Simpson.
Of all the introductions I've ever had, that was the most recent. And I can't tell you how I appreciated that. And I was born in Denver, but conceived in Wyoming. That's a distinction that I wanted to share. Well, it's a great evening for me. It's a great honor and a very certain privilege to be at this forum, because at this forum, at this university, at this institute, I spent 4 of the most precious and satisfying years of my life here at the Kennedy School at the request of my friend Marvin Kalb, who's lurking there this evening. He said to me in January of '97 when I left, he said, "I want you to come to Harvard to teach." I said, "Well, I've never taught anything." He said, "I know, but you have something to teach." And I thought, well, that's, if he's, anyway, enough of that. So Ann and I came. She's here tonight, 60 years with this glorious woman. There she is. And she said living with me was much like a religious experience, a living hell. No, she didn't say that. Now, and so 60 years, married all that time, of course. You don't even have to say that in politics anymore. I don't know why I even brought it up. We lived with the students at Elliott House on L22. We had the run of the place and the run of Boston. Dear friends were made here in this special 4 years that I taught a class entitled The Creating of Legislation, Congress, and the Press. Now remember, I couldn't have gotten into Harvard if I'd picked the locks. It was beyond my comprehension that I should be wandering about here, because I never graduated cum laude. I graduated thank the laude in all my institutions. Well, let me say I'm very pleased to share the evening with the David Nyhan family. He was a great guy. He was fair, firm, patriotic, and a hell of a lot of fun. He was warm, wise, and witty. He invited me into more stuff around here. You may recall his family say, "Where are you going with that guy?" But he took me to his clubs and his organizations, and it was a wonderful time. And there are dear friends here in this audience tonight, friends we made before and after Harvard, David and Rosalie there, and Marv over here, and oh Lord, I started, there's Graham and Richard and Tom and Edie and on and Sheila. It was a wonderful experience, and I conducted and hosted many a forum in this wonderful place, and now it's been all redone in a new and remarkable way. A great arena for discourse and discussion and diversity and thought. I've always had a most interesting relationship with the press. I had the strange view that the First Amendment belonged to me too. It's a sick idea, I know, but just thought I'd throw it out there. And so that I got to whack on them as they got to whack on me. It seemed to me that that was very fair to do that. And it worked because I always had another rule. In every case, when they're after your butt, answer the phone. And I did that. No tricks, no slanting, no cover-up, no gimmicks, just answer their questions. And I often enjoyed these Teddy White lectures and the panel discussions. And so to be honored myself gives me great pleasure. In fact, a guy could even get a little cocky. Well, no, I didn't mean that. I just threw it in. Anyway, it tickles me to death to do this, because I met Teddy when I came to the U.S. Senate in 78, 79, and he was often in the halls because he was a journalist. He was a denizen of Dorchester. That's where he was born. And then Harvard, as Alex says, he commanded respect. And not all of us in journalism or politics command much of that in these times. I've always had a deep belief that two things could make things better and make the world of government and public service a better place. I think politicians should give up their cherished plea, "I want to go off the record." That's a cover your fanny special. And any journalist that would listen too long to a politician who continually wants to go off the record should go into a new work. Then, of course, the other one with the journalist, I think, would be to give up their sage-like anonymous source. I've never seen an anonymous source that said, "This is one of the greatest guys I've ever known." No, the source said, "This is a boneheaded, stone-age, mouth-breathing anthropoid," a high-placed official source said. That's beautiful stuff there. You never know who said it, probably the guy next to the desk next door. Well, anyway, but that's all part of public life and politics. There are those of us who grapple in this mysterious alchemy of politics. I would always say to my students, "So you don't like politics and partisanship, do you?" "No, I don't know. It's stupid, silly, banal, ugly, childish, negative, bizarre, irritating, and exhausting." So I tell them, well, then why don't you move to a country where they don't have any politics or any partisanship, and write me a note and tell me how much fun you're having. You would find there the loss of freedom of speech, the loss of right of assembly, the loss of freedom itself. And I would say to them too, you can't hate politics and love democracy. Take your pick, but you can't hate politicians and love democracy. It doesn't work that way. And of course, politics is on every tongue. The word itself, the word is interesting itself, comes from the Greek. The Greeks gave us a great word of democracy, including democracy. Poly meaning many, and ticks meaning blood-sucking insects. I had intended to leave that out, but I thought, well, what the hell, you're nothing to lose here. You have to know several truths first if you want to get through this kind of life's work. Because politics is its own, in its own selfish state, is barbaric. If that's all you were into is politics and you're consumed and obsessed with it, if that's all you have, you're never going to make it. You have to have the softening agents of life, which are music and theater and art and books and the visual arts and the performing arts and poetry, even if it's Robert Service. And without those things, pure politics can bring a person down. And it can bring a party down. It can certainly bring a country down. As for me, I've been on the A list and the Z list. I've been the toast of the town one day and toast the next. I can tell you all about those later. And you have your skin ripped off and find out that it grows back double strength. It's an interesting and curious thing. And you remember several vital things that I do. Humor is my sword and my shield. My mother taught me that humor was the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. Don't ever forget that one. And another one, hatred corrodes the container it's carried in. And in this country today, there is much hatred. I didn't say dislike, I said hatred. And it's a very corrosive force. So let me give you the definition of politics, be a test. No, really, not really. But it's mine. Nobody's tried to cabbage it, and here it is. It's important. In politics, there are no right answers. None. Only a continuing flow of compromises among groups, resulting in a changing, cloudy, and ambiguous series of public decisions where appetite and ambition compete openly with knowledge and wisdom. That's all there is. There's nothing you can develop that's better than that one. And then always remember, too, the human comedy aspects of all this, that in whatever group or association you are connected with, whether your business, your church, your club, any confluence of your colleagues anywhere, your fellow humans, you must remember that about 15% of those good people are screwballs, lightweights, and boobs. And you wouldn't want those people not represented in Congress. And they are. They're there. And they're all ours. That's another one to remember. And now, here we go. I know what time it is. I did not volunteer for the Debt Commission. Erskine and I were appointed by our president. He is my president, too. I feel strongly about that always. In January of 2010, and our commission worked for many months and on a serious issue, and turned in our report December 1st, 2010, with ringing non-endorsements from the president and every other living politician. Now, you'd think we'd be disappointed. No, we were just, no, we didn't. I didn't mean that either. We just went forward sturdily as we are, because people would say, well, who voted for this stuff? Well, it was a 67-page report called The Moment of Truth. It's written in English. It's a terrible thing. There are not a lot of graphs. And it uses words like going broke and shared sacrifice. These are tortuous words. And pain. We used things like that. 5 Democrats voted for it, 5 Republicans, 1 independent. That's pretty good. That's a supermajority of 18. And they said, well, who voted for it? Well, I said, Dick Durbin. Dick Durbin, that commie from Illinois, for the God's sake, you know. Well, Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, that right-wing kook, come on. And said, well, that's what's wrong with your country today. You just identify a guy and then rip him right there. Durbin was a big help. Andy Stern, the great union leader, was a great help. Later he said, I wish I'd voted for it. He's working hard on things for the union movement, and they need a lot of work, and he's in there. Good guy. Anyway, so the president took a walk from it because his reelection was looming. And his base would have said, look, wait a minute there, pal. You didn't close Guantanamo. We got a big mark on you on that one. You didn't knock the deficit in half. You got a big mark on that one. And now you're meddling around with the entitlements programs of precious seniors and veterans, and you will be dashed to the rocks. So he stepped away, and I think at that time, the Republicans probably would have caucused if he'd voted for it and decided to unanimously vote against it, because that's the bitterness that's out there and it's very real. So it was an extraordinary thing. Over on the right, as I say, the Republicans would have said, were they talking about taxes and revenue in there? And they said, yeah, oh Lord, we can't have that. Grover Norquist will come to your home by himself with his robes and speak to you in a Messiah-like fashion. So Erskine and I said, well, we'll just hit the road, tell people as we travel around the country, pull up a chair, we don't do BS or mush, and we'll tell you where your country is. So here it is, kind of short. We borrow $3.6 billion a day. For every buck we spend, we borrow 40 cents. We owe $16.5 trillion, but nobody knows what a trillion is, so that doesn't make a damn bit of difference to anybody. Healthcare is on automatic pilot and headed for Mount Everest, and forget what you call it. And it doesn't matter what you call it, because there's no cost containment in it until 2014 or after. And remember the doc fix? That was in the law, that we did something to docs on Medicare, and the minute we did it, they showed up in Congress and said, we can't have this, you can't do this to us. So we did a doc fix. That cost about $140 billion in the next 10 years. We'll do a fix for anybody that howls down the road. You can be assured of that. And they'll be assured because their contributions are unlimited to you in the campaigns, and there's no limit on the amount. So we were a little puzzled there. So I said, we have to tell them what a trillion is, Erskine. He said, well, Erskine is the numbers guy. I do the color. And so Erskine, I said, I've got it, Erskine. Here it is. The Big Bang Theory of the universe happened 13,800,000,000 years ago. And that ain't even close to a trillion, and we owe 17 of those babies. Now that's where we are. But then, of course, people go back to bed on that one. But I think it's important to know that it is actually impossible to describe that. So let me get to the great myths and distortion of the day. First, defense, with due respect to Ash Carter, who I think highly of. We dug into the Defense Department. We had 8 months to do so. Kent Conrad, Democrat, said, are we really hollowing out our defense? And Admiral Mullen and Joint Chiefs said, the greatest threat to America is not terrorism, it's the debt and the deficit. Because you see, defense is in the discretionary category. I won't get fancy here. But when something is on automatic pilot, like healthcare and Social Security, it will squeeze out all discretionary programs. Culture, education, all those things will be squeezed out, period. So that was Mullen's thought. And then we said, what is it we have here? Well, the defense budget is about $600 billion. I don't use charts, don't look. And the defense budget of the top 17 other countries on earth, including Russia and China combined, is $540 billion. 600 for us, 540 billion for the whole works out there, including Russia and China. Okay. We said, how many contractors do you have in the Defense Department? And they said, well, it's quite a range. And we said, could you tell us? And they said, yes, it's between 1 million and 10 million contractors. And these are guys knocking down 200 or 300 bucks an hour. These are flag officers that have gone into, I don't mind a guy going from a flag officer to Lockheed, but don't go back and start being an advisor to the Defense Department while you're banging down 200 or 300 bucks an hour. So we said, well, that seems like a curious thing. Could we have an audit of that? And they were just as bald-faced. They said it's impossible to audit the Defense Department. There's no way possible to do that. So we moved on. I am a veteran. If I hadn't been a veteran, what I'm about to say would get my epaulets ripped off, and you don't want to get your epaulets ripped off. That's very painful. I think it sounds like it anyway. So anyway, I was in the 12th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels. If I'd stayed another 8 years in the reserves, I would be a military retiree. That's pretty good. There are only 2.2 million of them, a very small cohort of people. And they have their own health care plan. It's called TRICARE. And the premium is $540 a year and no copay. And 85% of the money goes to the dependents, and the cost per year is $53 billion. You don't want to talk about that, or the VFW and the American Legion will visit your home at night. I'm a member of both those groups. They found me, and they know where I live. And so I said, that just doesn't seem right. So we dug further. And we found there are 200 commissaries in the United States. They're right next to Kroger's and Safeway, and they all are staffed by Department of Defense people. They were a recruiting device, except the only thing is they're used by retirees who can buy their scotch for 20 bucks a bottle and their lettuce for less. And that's the way that works. But the best one of all, there are 64 Department of Defense schools in this country. Have you ever heard of those? They're in Europe and Asia, and they should be. That's for dependents. Ann was a sub on one of those when we were at Fort Benning and Fort Lewis. Well, they all have a superintendent, they all have principals, they all have teachers, they're all a bus ride from a public school, and they cost $51,000 a student for less than 20,000 students. And we can't fuel the Harry Truman in the Gulf or give a hot breakfast in Afghanistan to the troops. Ladies and gentlemen, that's bullshit. And that is a tragedy to be visited upon Americans, that if you then challenge that, you are a commie. You must not like veterans. Well, I like veterans. In fact, when I left the Senate, the veterans budget was $49 billion in health care for 5.5 million veterans, and they get the best care you can imagine. I've been to Walter Reed. I've seen them pick them up at Ramstein and take them in and what they do with them. Today, the budget is $150 billion with 100,000 less veterans. So when somebody tells you we're not taking care of the veterans, that's a fake. That's fakery. It's lying. So that quick coverage there, as I say, we were startled, absolutely startled at the cost. They really are the department of everything. They are into education. They're into energy. They have a program called the Grill Sergeant, which I don't know what that costs, but the guy can tell you. He's a member of the DOD. He can tell you how to grill things and do things. Absolutely unbelievable. Now, on, quickly. As to health care, forget the names and the nastiness. Forget it. Call it any name you want. It can't possibly work. Because we spend twice as much as any other developed country on earth, and that would be okay if the outcomes were good. However, our outcomes are 25th to 50th in the world. And that has to do with child mortality, preventive care, such gauges as made. It's the monster in the midway. It's the mastodon in the kitchen. Run your brain just a little without getting into theory. There are people who take theory and try to make it work in practice, but people who take practice and try to make it work in theory. That's a different kind. So here it is. You're going to take care of a pre-existing condition in a 3-year-old that could live to be 60. One person in the United States weighs more than the other two. That is a statistic. It is, and it's not a funny statistic at all. You got diabetes A and B endemic throughout this country. You got people who choose to do booze, tobacco, and drugs, and if you think they're going to the wellness program next week, the drinks are on me. You got 10,000 a day turning 65. You got to do something with tort reform. I'm a trial lawyer. I have 2 sons. We have 2 sons, trial lawyers. And they say, hey, Pop, what are you up to? Well, you got to do something. Defensive medicine and the cost of that. You got to do something with doctors. You can't just continue to do this doc fix, and all the rest of it. You got to do something with Medicaid, where they all run off to the governor to see who can dump most of it on the federal government and get it off the states. You got to do something with hospitals who keep 2 sets of books instead of 1, and that happens in every hospital in America. Got to do something with providers who make something for 83 cents and sell it to the feds for $3.50. Got to do something with the guy who could buy this building, gets a heart operation for $200,000 and never even gets a bill. Who is kidding who? What business? What can you not start to believe? So, then you got a wonderful one called Part B premiums. That's voluntary for seniors. You don't have to take it, but if you do, you only pay 25 or 35% of the premium, and the guys working in the kitchens at Harvard Yard are paying the other 60 or 75%. What's fair about that? Tell me. That's this country. I think people can handle the truth if it's not shrouded by full-page ads and all the rest of it. And the final blow here is Social Security. Oh, well, that's it. I have had more guff from people over 60, the nastiest bunch of emails, brutish stuff, foul. Oh, people over 60 aren't even affected at any reform that's ever been yet suggested, and they howl like a gut-shot panther because they're goaded by the senior groups. And forget whether Social Security is part of the national debt or separate. It's the biggest expenditure of the government. So if you can play hide and seek with it, go ahead, but it won't go away. It's $900 billion negative cash flow today. And it started down the road in May of 2010. And in the year 2033, 20 years from now, you're going to waddle up to the window and get a check for 23% less. And who is telling us that? The trustees of the system. Vital Republicans and Democrats. Everything I'm saying you want to go look up, because you'll say, God, that Simpson came in here and just ranted and ran around the circle and just saved figures that just, well, anyway, hang on tight, I'm damn near through. And of course, how about your grandchildren and your children? I asked the AARP higher-ups, I said, are there any patriots in here or just marketers? Go look at their publications. It's about cruises and insurance and chairs and things to go, erectile dysfunction ads, right there, they're critical things there, of course, and other things like that. It's funny, but it ain't funny. It is a marketing paper. And I said to them, why don't you get in the game? And they know what to do. They know what to do. And what they do need to know is do the chain CPI. I know that sounds crazy. The president has suggested we go to this new formula, chain CPI. Erskine and I recommended it. The ARP is doing full-page ads of people with tears running down their cheeks, saying that they're going to be out to lunch forever if the CPI is changed. And if we do it, it can save about, $120 billion over 10 years. Anyway, the Social Security money wasn't stolen. The reserves weren't stolen by politicians. The law provided that if they needed bucks in the reserves, you pulled it out, got T-bills in there, gilt-edged, and then when you needed the bucks, you went and got it, and it works. Anyway, so Erskine and I said, why don't we do something good? We didn't touch SSI, we didn't touch food stamps, we didn't touch the most vulnerable. We said, let's give the lowest 20% 125% of poverty. That'll cost. Give the older an extra kick from 81 to 85, an extra kick. Go to the chain CPI, and then critically important step would be to make it more progressive. We did. Change the bend points. That's inside baseball. Don't pay attention. And then we said we should raise the retirement age to 68 by the year 2050. They said, the AARP said, how will old people ever be able to prepare for that? I said, well, you got 40 years to figure it out. I think they could probably track it together. And don't forget, it's going to be 67 in the year 27. I just heard my wife clear her throat, which means move on quickly. You didn't hear it, but let me tell you, it's like a dog whistle. So now, a final note. And this is, you've heard this at every talk you've ever been to. In conclusion, and then 20 minutes, no, just relax, Alex. Just sit right there. And a final note, the tax code. let me tell you, Erskine and I, our eyes were bugged. The tax code has 180 plus things in there called tax expenditures. Well, what are those? Well, they're spending by any possible name you can conjure. They're deductions, loopholes, earmarks. They cost $1,100,000,000,000 a year. And the total income, individual income in 2011 was $1,100,000,000,000 a year. Sucked it all up. So we said, got an idea, get rid of all of them. Get rid of all of them and go to what people have been crying for, broaden the base, improve the rates, get spending out of the code. We said, okay, we'll do that. So if you go from 0 to 70 grand, you pay 8%. 70 grand to 210, you pay 14. Anything over that, you pay 23. Take the corporate rate to 26 from 36 and go to a territorial system where you can bring the bucks back without getting it hit twice. And as Erskine says at that point, he says, my Democrat pals will come up to me and say, good heavens, you don't want to do that. Those people will just use it to pay dividends and buy back their stock. And Erskine said, what the hell is wrong with that? At least it would be in the United States. So those are the perils of what we do. And if you have a cherished sacred cow and you want to put it back in, then what rate are you going to raise? It's called, if you want it, pay for it. And we've made promises in this country we can't possibly keep and never will keep. The final shot is that only 20% of the American people use 80% of the stuff in the code. Try that one. So when people say, well, yeah, 48% don't pay any tax, I said, yeah, that's true. But only 20% of the American people use 80% of the fun and games in the tax code. That doesn't seem quite fair to me. And only 27% of the American people itemize, which means 3/4 of our fellow citizens have never heard of the goodies in the tax code. So if there's anyone I haven't pissed off yet, if they would raise their arm, and I'll talk to them later, I'll have a drink. I get worse if I have a drink. We're at a point right now where Dick Durbin used to say, where is the tipping point? And I like Dick Durbin. I think he's terrific. He said, where's the tipping point? And Erskine and the money guys know where it is. There's a name for it. It comes quick. It could come in 2 years, 2 months. But when it comes, it's fast. It's grab your money. Something's happening. So the people that will have loaned us $20 trillion will say, we love you. You have a dysfunctional government. You're addicted to debt. We still love you. You have a lot of resources, and we want a little more money for our money. And at that point, inflation will kick in, and interest rates will go up, and the guy that gets hosed is the little guy that everybody talks about day and night, the little guy. A terrible irony. So I think we're at a point now where Americans have to remember that they're citizens first. They've forgotten that. They're not members of the NRA first, or the AARP first, or the Club for Growth first, or the AFL-CIO first. For God's sakes, they're citizens first. And for God's sake, if they can't begin to think about what they're going to do and what's happening with the institutions that push them, and they worship the God of re-election. And so I was glad to leave you with some of this. The other hope, and this is very critical, the other hope for me is this president, and any president, wants a legacy. That is what they all want, and they should want. And if he doesn't get more involved with Congress and get his hands dirty, as Senator Angus King of Maine has said, he's got to come in and do a pull a Lincoln and get in it with the Congress, and if he doesn't slow the growth of health care, and it can be, we've recommended what we did in our commission, and restore solvency to Social Security for 75 years, he will have a failed presidency. And he doesn't want that. No one would. But if you're at the point where we are right now, that all the anguish you've been grousing about, the sequester and the cliff hanging, didn't affect 2/3 of the American budget. Not just 1/3 is what you got. you didn't get anything because they won't touch what I've just discussed. So with that, I just say, let me just share one corny thing. Let me share with you, I think we forget too much. I think we forget our greatness. I think we forget our role in the world, and yet not be arrogant. I think we forget we're the only nation on earth founded on a belief in God. Whether you like that or not is not the issue. That's the way it was. We forget our strengths, we forget our blessings, we forget our roots of escaping tyranny, religious tyranny and all tyranny. We forget we're one of the first countries on earth to free the slaves. I just think we should treat ourselves with a lighter hand and be tender with each other. Remember, too, we must be a pretty good country. Why would everybody on earth be trying to get here? We should be proud of our heritage and our generosity and our hospitality and our diversity. And as the civil wars tear at the throats of other countries, remember, we had one too. It was brother against brother, and in 5 days, across 5 Aprils, more died than died in the whole horror of Vietnam. 5 days. And we lost about 700,000. They're still working the figures, died in that war. So I think we should be slow to judge others, swift to defend the weak, steady in our resolve to combat evil, and ready at all times and places to speak well of a pretty damn fine experiment which is called America. Thank you very much. That's great, Alex. Oh, yes, questions.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Senator. We now come to the part of each one of these evenings where we invite you in the audience to ask questions. I hope that those of you who have questions of Senator Simpson will come to the microphone here, there's one up here, one up here, and we will have, we'll try to persuade Senator Simpson to say what he really thinks. Yes.
I love it.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Amna, a sophomore at the college. I was just wondering if you could touch on a little bit about campaign finance reform and if there are any changes you'd like to see and if there's anything that you think the media should do in terms of covering that issue. Thank you.
Well, I heard that. That was the most amazing thing. Sometimes I get in an auditorium and I've had an 81 millimeter mortar platoon and we never heard of an earplug. So I heard that. I heard what you said.
Oh.
Not that I'll answer it, but no. Bill Bradley and I and Warren Rudman were part of Americans for Campaign Reform. Bob Kerrey, wonderful guy. 2 Dems, 2 Republicans. We've been working on it. John Rao up here is the executive director, up in your neighbor to the north. And that is the most critical thing. And then along came the Supreme Court decision saying that there is such a thing as corporate personhood. There is no corporate personhood. The First Amendment was for people. And now a corporation can give unlimited funds, even anonymously now. It is the worst possible situation. We try to work on it. Several states have tried, got New Mexico, Arizona, Maine. States trying to do it themselves. States are trying to do a lot of things themselves because the feds are not moving. That's why you have the troubles with immigration on border states. If nobody understands a border state better than a border state, what are they going to do? Anyway, I just say it is very, very sad what is happening because it takes away. People think that a guy is on the take and that they're owned. And one of the candidates last year had a person that gave them $50 million. And there's a case going on in the Supreme Court right now, which is going to open it a little further. And at that point, the people will just say, you know, what's my $5, you know? But it's the most critical. I wish I knew the answer. But as long as that Supreme Court decision is on the books and as they begin to develop it, I think that campaign finance reform is a long way away.
Hi, Senator Simpson. My name is Luke Gilroy. I'm a student here at Kennedy. My question to you is about what has changed in politics that has led to this polarization and lack of compromise, and how do we as individuals fight against it to try to move back towards being able to compromise better?
Well, first, what we saw quickly was a complete lack of trust. When I was in Congress, trust was the coin of the realm, and that coin is severely tarnished, intra-party as well as inter-party. And you used to shake hands. I know that's corny too. Ted Kennedy and I worked together on immigration and many other things, and I didn't always agree with him, obviously, but when he said, "I'm with you," he was with you. If he said, "I'm not with you," or "I'm going to put an amendment, it's going to shoot you out of the water, here's what it is," that's great, that's what it's about. But this is sneaky stuff now. And there's a complete lack of trust, and it is in a caucus. They try to figure, how can we do a bill that will embarrass Bill Clinton? How can we do a bill that will embarrass George W.? I finally said, well, look, why not do something for the country? It's a sick idea, and just kind of do something. And then we have people in our party who say that obstructionism is the key to patriotism, and that compromise is a filthy word. Well, let me tell you, there are historians in this room that tell you that without compromise, we wouldn't have had a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution. It was a continual compromise among groups. Jefferson wrote on the actual Declaration of Independence in his own handwriting. Finally, it looked like, oh, whatever. He just got tired. He was, inalienable. No, do this. And now you have people who just, compromise. And if you can't learn to compromise an issue without compromising yourself, you should never be in a legislative body, a council, a school board, Congress, and you should never be married.
Hello, thank you, Senator, for speaking. I'm actually not an American. I'm from the United Kingdom and a college student here. But I have a question about the future of the Republican Party. Because it seems to me that the kind of radical Tea Party wing has lost touch with the mainstream of American politics. And there's a news article today about Sarah Palin's re-emergence and Rand Paul and all of these big radical figures. And I'd love to hear more specifics about what you think about the future of the party.
The Tea Party is not a party. It's a movement. And they don't deserve the title of party, but let me tell you why. They started up for two reasons. They were alarmed at spending and the size of the debt. And they were slowly captured in the social issues. And when you get into that, where we've had some brilliant candidates speaking of legitimate rape, which is a dazzling statement in itself. The woman in Delaware was involved in witchcraft. She was a clever one. We could have beat Harry Reid like a drum in Nevada and had two wonderful women candidates, but then when Harry saw this gal who could get a chance, he started to funnel money in there himself. I said, Harry, I don't blame you for that. It's worth it. It worked. So I would not be welcome. If I had to go through the Central Committee of Wyoming, they wouldn't put me on the ballot that I could get elected because I'd get, some good Democrat votes. But I thought our party was government out of your life, the precious right of privacy, and the right to be left alone. It's a glorious statement, and the Tea Party liked that. And I say, well, then what the hell are you doing on abortion? Abortion has got to be the most hideous thing I can imagine. I practice real law. I really know something about humans. And people were faced with death and go to decisions like that. I don't want to ever be in it, but I tell you, abortion is a deeply intimate and personal decision. And I don't think men legislators should even vote on it, okay? I have a gay cousin. We're all God's children. We're all human beings. What the hell is that all about? I've worked with the Republican Unity Coalition. shepherd was killed in Wyoming by a couple of drunken slobs, and and Wyoming people were stunned and offended. So, and then I talk about mental health issues, so I couldn't get to first base. But, you know, I just keep mumbling into the vapors.
Hi, my name's Madeline. I'm a freshman at the college, and I'm going to be asking a question on behalf of the Twitter community. Which journalists do you think have gotten it right in terms of uncovering how government budgets operate?
I didn't hear.
Which journalists do you think have gotten it right in terms of uncovering how government budgets operate?
Which journalists have gotten it right when it comes to uncovering what?
Budgets, yeah.
The budget?
How budgets operate. In other words, which journalists are doing the best job?
Well, one's here, she'll be part of the panel tomorrow. She follows it and watches with bemusement. There she is. And there's, in the Washington Post, Lori Montgomery. But you don't have the, there's no time for any journalist to do anything but hang on by their thumbs with a 24/7 news cycle where they should be off, as Gloria Borger said today, they should be off asking the questions of people, but they don't have the time. So I don't know. All I know is that I always like to talk to young journalists so that I can tell them that they'll have nothing unless they get off their fanny and start talking about the issues that are crowding them off the page by the senior citizens groups. And the AARP is Exhibit A. And then there's the Committee for the Preservation of Social Security and Medicare. They really are something. And then there's the silver-haired legislators and the senior bombers and the Pink Panthers and the Gray Panthers. And the young people have nobody except www. The Can Kicks Back. Tune that one up, www.thecankicksback.org. And it's young people, Democrats and Republicans, saying, wait a minute, the can gets kicked down the road and we won't get a lick. And they won't. And they'll say, well, I don't care, I won't get anything anyway. I said, well, you put in 6.2% of your salary, you're going to be kind of wrinkled when you walk up to the window anyway. And so it's awesome. It's power. And then the AARP the other day accused Erskine and I of fueling intergenerational warfare. I said, hell, it's over. That war ended. You were the winner. You get the Nobel Peace Prize now. You lay back in the weeds some more. Anyway, it's funny, but it ain't funny. But it's tragic. And don't forget, disability insurance will be gone in 2 years. Gone. Why? In a tough economy, a guy can't work. He's going to go to the doc again and again and again. Finally, they say, well, I think you have a disability. And it's not ugly, but that will be completely broke. We can't even change the date of Medicare to match Social Security. When I was a freshman at the University of Wyoming, there were 16 people paying into Social Security and 1 taking out. Today there are 3 people paying in and 1 taking out, and in 10 years, 2 people paying in and 1 taking out. Who the hell is going to be those 2 people kicking in $12,000 a year for some old coot dragging down 24? These are real. And, I'm just goofy enough to keep throwing it out there. But you have to pay attention, and especially young journalists. It's critical.
We'll take 2 more questions here.
Good evening. My name is Auden Lawrence, and I'm a sophomore at the college. Thinking about many of the issues about which you spoke, disagreements over entitlement reform, disagreements over health care, and issues with our national debt, what advice would you give to a student who wants to give his or her life to public service and does believe that we are, as you said, citizens first?
The last part there, I heard the dedicating your life to public service.
Young people who believe, as you described it, that they believe that they are citizens first. What advice to those young people?
Well, I would go to I would go to, they still have town meetings. They don't like them, but they go. I mean, the congresspersons. And the next time you go, and the person gets up and says, I know this is one of the most critical times in our history, and I want to tell you people that we can get it done. I'm going to help you get it done, and we can do it without touching precious Medicare, precious Medicaid, precious defense, and precious Social Security. And then you should rise and say, you, sir, are telling an interminable inexactitude. Not only that, but intolerant inexactitude. And that will dazzle them for a second. And then just say, I could not support anyone that's not going to put their shoulder to the wheel. And for the older people, they're going to come to you and ask for a political contribution and say, where are you on Bowles-Simpson? We don't use Bowles-Simpson because of the acronym. That's why we switched to Simpson-Bowles. But we, just nail them. Nail them. And I really believe that if people just, apathy is, well, it's a tough one. When I was your age, I was drinking. It was not a good thing. And then, as I told the people today, talking about their public, who's going to run for public office? Where are the good people? They're not going to run. They got to drag up a picture of them sitting under a tree with their hair hanging to their navels with a bong pipe, my paper. So, you're going to lose good people. I was on federal probation for shooting mailboxes. I'm going with this beautiful woman. I hit a cop in the mouth. It was into the clink. I needed $300 bail, and I called her. I said, I'm in jail. I need $300 bail. She said, look, I'm working my way through school. Just sit there. But when I ran for public office, I put that right out there first. And I got every vote in the House. But if you go in and think you're going to hide something, the media will find it. The media, with the help from, the girlfriend or the boyfriend that got slapped by you back in 2000, whatever, it ain't worth it. And so good people aren't in. So the only guys that are in there are less than lustrous. And they just don't, they're terrified of losing election. I think Ted Cruz has really been slapped around in his own caucus. They took him on. They said, wait a minute, Buster, you're running ads against me. I'm in your party. And that's your face in that ad. And by God, I'm tired of it. And they took on he and Lee, the other guy from Utah. And even the Houston Chronicle, which said, we toasted this man to the high heavens. Cruz is just but we withdraw all of our recommendation for him because he's not for the country, he's not for Texas, he's for himself. And so things are changing slowly, but don't forget, if you want to knock Boehmer around, and people love that, just remember, the next go-round, when the Tea Party guys in his party say, wait a minute, we got a new one here now, because, the last time, it was a case of like, when your horse drops dead, it's better to get off. And so Obamacare would never be repealed, but now he can say to his Tea Party guys, look, I stopped the government for 2 weeks for you jerks, and it's over. It ain't going to happen again. You can whine and snort and do anything you want, but the game is over. So either get in the game or keep standing over there in the corner, but I don't owe you anything more. I paid my dues to you guys.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Jacob Morello, and I'm a junior at the college. So my question is about the budget process. I think a lot of people would argue that it's not working the way that it was intended to work, and the past 5 or so years we've ended up in these budget showdowns that ultimately end up in a continuing resolution at the 11th hour. So what do you think can be done to reform the process, if anything, so that we have a functioning budget process?
You, young man, are right on track. We haven't had a budget for 5 years. The biggest country on earth with resources and no budget. They are now, because of the latest package, they're talking about a conference committee to balance the budget. They're in session. They come in tomorrow for their first or second gathering. They have the ability to do it. And if they don't do it, again, the creditors are just going to keep on us. But you're absolutely right, and watch this. It's called a conference committee because the Senate has passed a budget bill, and the House. They're very different, but there's what a conference committee is for, to resolve the differences. And if that happens, you should be very cheered. But if it doesn't, the can gets kicked down, and in February we'll go through this again and again. But you're a perceptive rascal.
He's a Harvard student.
Harvard, yes, I see that. Well, they're good people.
Senator, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to remind you all that both Senator Simpson and Leonard Pitts Jr. will be taking part in a panel tomorrow as we discuss the issues raised tonight and others as well. They will be joined by Jackie Calms, who covers the White House for the New York Times, Beth Myers, a senior advisor for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign, and Clarence Page, 1989 winner of the Pulitzer Prize for commentary for his syndicated column. That will be at 9 o'clock at the top of the Taubman building, which is just across the inner area here at the Harvard Kennedy School. And there will be, on the top floor, we will have coffee and rolls and so forth at 8:30, and my program will start at 9. It should be a very lively conversation, and we hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. To both Mr. Pitts and Senator Simpson, we admire your work and thank you for being with us tonight and allowing us to honor you.